Woohoo!
The film begins in 1972, near the end of the Vietnam War. Amidst a battlefield strewn with bodies and a crashed helicopter, American soldier Nick Parker survives, but is left blind. Disoriented, he wanders through the swamp in search of his friend, Frank Devereaux, unaware that his unit, thinking he was dead, had already retreated. However, he falls into a trap and is captured by villagers. Hours later, Nick wakes to find himself not in danger, but being cared for by kind-hearted locals in a Vietnamese village. The villagers welcome Nick warmly, treating his wounds with herbal medicine and ensuring he was well cared for. One man took him in as a student, teaching him hand-to-hand combat and swordsmanship. As Nick healed, months of intense training sharpened his hearing to the point where he could sense his surroundings and detect danger without sight. 20 years later, Nick lives in the United States as a retired war veteran. He has mastered the use of his cane, which doubles as a concealed sheath for the hidden sword he now wields with precision. One afternoon at a roadside diner, Nick sees a group of drunken men harassing a woman. When her purse lands near his table, he seizes the moment to act. With lightning-fast reflexes and remarkable skill, he swiftly takes down the thugs. Unlike Nick, Frank Devereaux's life took a darker path. He was once happily married to Lynn, and they had a son, Billy. Early on, they lived a quiet life in Reno, Nevada, supported by Frank's work as a chemical engineer. Things took a turn when Frank became a regular at a Las Vegas casino run by drug kingpin Kevin McCready. Addicted to gambling, he quickly racked up massive debt and was forced to work for McCready as an underground chemist, producing drug materials. As he sank deeper into the criminal world, Frank abandoned his wife and son to pursue a relationship with Annie, a waitress at the same casino. After years of working for McCready, Frank came to loathe his role in drug production, the very trade that had ruined countless lives, including his own. Though he longed to escape, he remained trapped, still burdened by unpaid debts. McCready's henchmen now have Frank hanging upside down on the casino rooftop, threatening him to produce a special drug batch for an upcoming high-stakes deal. When Frank refuses, McCready resorts to a brutal tactic, kidnapping his ex-wife and son to force his cooperation. Elsewhere, Nick stops by Lynn's home, hoping to reconnect with his old friend Frank. Welcoming him in, Lynn shares a cup of tea and some news she and Frank are divorced. He's been living in Reno on the other side of the country, and she hasn't heard from him in years. Just then, a loud knock at the door cuts their conversation short. Lynn answers to find two men claiming to be police officers. Without waiting, they step inside and ask to see Billy Devereaux, insisting he's a key witness in an ongoing case and must be questioned. Minutes later, a large man named Slag arrives, McCready's trusted enforcer. Sensing trouble, Nick steps in and demands the fake officers produce a warrant. Slag suddenly attacks, wrapping his hands around Lynn's throat. Billy rushes in to save her, but is violently hurled against the wall, knocked unconscious. Moments later, a gunshot rings out, Lynn is hit and crumples to the floor. Watching it all unfold, Nick explodes with rage. Nick instantly draws his sword and charges into the fight. Though blind, he defeats the corrupt officer with precise, expert strikes and severely wounds Slag, who manages to escape. With the danger temporarily past, Nick hurries to Lynn's side, but he's too late. In her final moments, she begs him to look after Billy. Silently, Nick holds her hand. When Billy regains consciousness, Nick tells him they're heading to Nevada to find his father. When the boy asks about his mother, Nick shields him from the truth, gently assuring her she's still at home. Nick and Billy head to the bus station and buy tickets for a long interstate trip. Meanwhile, across the country, Frank reads about his ex-wife's death and his son's disappearance in the newspaper. Realizing McCready is behind it, he reluctantly agrees to resume drug production under strict supervision. Meanwhile, Billy and Nick's journey begins on tense footing. Billy is clearly uneasy around Nick and even mocks his blindness. That night, he secretly checks Nick's wallet, but Nick, aware of the attempt, lets it slide, choosing not to intervene. Inside the wallet, Billy finds an old photo of his father and Nick from their military days. The discovery piques his curiosity and leads him to wonder how Nick became blind. In a flashback, Nick, Frank, and their unit are celebrating their final day of service in Vietnam, ready to head home. But amid the cheerful mood, their base is abruptly hit by a fierce assault from Vietnamese rebel forces. In response, they devise a plan Frank would lay down covering fire while Nick sneaks up on the enemy line. But the strategy unravels when they're ambushed from both sides simultaneously. Amid the chaos, Frank panics and bolts for cover, leaving Nick to face the gunfire alone. A nearby mortar blast hurls Nick through the air, leaving him permanently blind. Yet despite everything, Nick never blames Frank for abandoning him. In the present, the bus carrying Nick and Billy stops at a gas station near a sprawling cornfield for breakfast. Seizing the moment, Billy dashes to a nearby payphone to call his mother. But Nick catches him just in time and pulls him aside for a private talk. There, Nick finally reveals the truth about Billy's mother's death. Stunned and betrayed by the earlier lie, Billy can't accept the loss. Overwhelmed, he panics and runs into the cornfield. Nick searches desperately through the dense corn maze but quickly loses track of Billy. Amid the chaos, Slag and his henchmen who had been secretly tailing them suddenly emerge and begin combing the cornfield, hunting for the boy. Slag drags Billy to a small shack in the middle of the field while his men fan out to track and kill Nick. But drawing on his combat skills and sharp instincts, Nick turns the tables, silently taking them out one by one without a trace. As Slag heads toward the shack, he spots Nick from afar and opens fire. But Nick, guided by his heightened hearing, evades every shot. While Slag reloads, Nick seizes the moment, striking a key support beam and collapsing the shack. He then charges in, delivering a series of lethal sword blows to Slag. Nick swiftly carries Billy out of the cornfield. Unbeknownst to him, Slag survives the impact of Nick's attack, reduced by a shock-resistant vest hidden beneath his shirt. Meanwhile, news of Slag's failure reaches MacCready. Believing his son is in MacCready's hands, Frank works tirelessly to finish the drug batch. In truth, however, MacCready has neither captured Billy nor found the blind man wreaking havoc. Nick and Billy take shelter by the riverside for the night. There, Billy finally breaks down, grieving his mother and all he's lost. Nick carries his own silent sorrow, but he can't cry his tear ducts were destroyed in the mortar blast years ago. The next morning, Nick and Billy resume their journey, catching a ride to Frank's home in Reno. Still shaken, Billy hesitates, believing his father no longer cares. With quiet reassurance, Nick explains that sometimes forgiveness is the only way to start again. The two approach the front door and knock. Annie answers with a warm smile and invites them in. But as soon as Nick steps inside, he senses something is wrong. His instincts prove right. MacCready's henchmen, Lyle and Tector, quietly waiting in the shadows. Lyle strikes swiftly, knocking Nick unconscious, while Tector restrains Billy. They then abduct all three, Nick, Billy, and Annie, loading them into the back of a truck before driving off. Though Annie is with them, it's clear she was forced to come and had no idea things would turn violent. As the truck races toward Las Vegas, Nick slowly regains consciousness and grasps the danger he and Billy are now in. Nick hears a clatter as Tector hurls his cane out of the truck, sending it bouncing into the grass along the highway. Sensing the spot could be key to their escape, Nick quietly tells Billy to remember the location. Thinking fast, Nick tells Billy to grab a lighter from his back pocket. Together, they ignite a burlap sack, filling the truck with thick, choking smoke. Seizing the chance, Nick springs into action, quickly overpowering both Lyle and Tector and knocking them out onto the roadside. Annie quickly takes the wheel, turns the truck around, and drives back toward Reno, getting Nick and Billy out of harm's way. But when they stop to retrieve Nick's discarded cane, things take a turn. Lyle and Tector, now conscious, hijack a car from a nearby elderly couple and speed off toward Reno in pursuit. While scrambling to retrieve his cane, Nick accidentally shatters Annie's car window, heightening the chaos. Just then, their pursuers arrive, forcing Nick to take the wheel. With Billy guiding him, they dive into a high-speed chase through the crowded city. The chase ends when Nick skillfully maneuvers the car, causing Lyle and Tector's vehicle to crash into oncoming traffic. Although both pursuers survive the collision, they temporarily lose track of their targets. Meanwhile, Annie brings Nick and Billy to an RV owned by her friend Colleen, offering them a safe place to rest. There, the three spend the night, taking time to physically recover from the recent chaos. The next morning, Nick prepares to head to Las Vegas alone to rescue his old friend from MacCready. But before he can leave, Billy wakes up and steps in to stop him. Billy pleads with Nick not to leave, even calling him uncle, a heartfelt sign of the trust and bond forming between them. But Nick gently urges him to stay strong, promising he'll bring Frank back safely. Nick arrives in Las Vegas and quietly approaches MacCready's casino, where he eavesdrops on the drug lord's conversation. McCready reveals plans to leave for a ski resort to seal a major deal and orders Frank's execution after midnight once the drug batch is complete. Later, as Vince, the casino's assistant manager, heads to his penthouse, Nick secretly follows and memorizes the door code. Back at the casino, he begins playing and winning hand after hand, quickly attracting a crowd's attention. Soon after, casino security approached Nick, inviting him to risk all his winnings on a single roulette spin. But it was a setup. The wheel was rigged with a hidden device. Nick was tricked and lost everything. However, Nick's sharp hearing picks up a faint beeping from a guard's pocket. Acting fast, he draws his sword and strikes with precision, slicing open the pocket to reveal the hidden device used to rig the game. Chaos erupts in the casino, and Nick seizes the moment to slip away toward the penthouse. Using the code he memorized, he gains access and makes his way to the heavily guarded top floor. Using his expert skills, Nick silently neutralized several guards before breaking into the deputy director's office. There, he held Vince at sword point, forcing him to reveal Frank's location. Under pressure, Vince admitted Frank was being held and forced to work in a lab at the end of the hallway. With the information he needed, Nick knocked Vince unconscious and slipped out. In the next scene, he finally reunites with Frank, who confesses the guilt he's carried since Vietnam. Nick reassures him there's no resentment, only a desire to see him reunited with his son. Nick and Frank crafted homemade napalm bombs, rode the cable car up the mountain, and used their military training to take down McCready's men. At the penthouse, they found McCready holding Billy and Annie at gunpoint, ready for their arrival and backed by a hired Japanese assassin to face Nick. A brutal sword fight erupted between Nick and the Japanese assassin, ending when Nick shot him into the hot tub. Suddenly, a henchman appeared and shot Nick in the shoulder, knocking him down. As the thug mocked his blindness, Nick seized the moment, hurling his sword and killing him instantly. McCready charged in to intervene, but was intercepted by Frank. The two wrestled violently on the floor, struggling for control of the gun. Amid the chaos, McCready accidentally pulled the trigger, fatally shooting himself and bringing his plans to an end. Nick delivered a final, decisive sword strike, ending the last threat. With the danger behind them, Frank reunited with his family and left for San Francisco. Though invited to join, Nick chose his own path, quietly slipping away and leaving behind a train ticket as a silent farewell. Billy chased after Nick, begging him to stay, but Nick had already decided. Before leaving, he urged Billy to take care of his family. In the final scene, Nick crosses the street and fades into the crowd. Overcome with emotion, Billy throws a toy dinosaur off the bridge. Nick catches it silently. The film ends with Billy, holding back tears, calling out one last time, promising to always remember him.